Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Freddie McBride. I'm EENA's Director for Digital Communications Policy and Regulation. We're going to continue the theme of next generation in this last track 1 session of the day. We're going to focus on location in next generation. We'll take a bit of a deep dive into it. There should be a bit of the theoretical stuff, conceptual level stuff, and practical aspects as well. So I'm delighted to be joined on stage by Michael Pröstler, who is CEO of GridGears, by Deepti, Bharti, who is Director of Software Engineering, Research and Development at Creativity Software, and also by Peter Woodward, who is the Chief Executive Officer of Eli Technologies. You're all very welcome, and thank you for being here today. So Michael is up first, and his presentation is on how location is handled within the next generation framework. So Michael, the floor is yours.
Yeah, welcome everybody. Glad to see you, and thanks Freddie for the kind introduction. So my name is Michael Pröstler, and I'm going to talk about location information in NG112. And I'm focusing more on the general aspect and how we deal with location information in NG112. But before we get started, I would start with a little experiment here. So imagine you're in an emergency situation right here, right now, and you're calling for emergency services. So one of the first questions will be, where are you? So please raise your hand if you would recall that you are at the EENA conference in Riga. And I would expect now all hands to go up, otherwise it would be pretty, yeah, perfect. So please keep your hand up. And keep your hand up if you would also recall that you are at the Radisson Blu Hotel. Okay, that's good. Keep your hand up if you recognize the address of that hotel. Elizabeth Street 73, perfect. Okay, there are some hands up. Please keep your hand up if you also recognize that I made a little mistake here. So we are not actually at Elizabeth Street 73, but we are at Elizabeth Street 55. And based on that small example, thank you for participating, we already see that determining your location is not always as easy as it seems, especially in emergency situations. Emergency situations are stressful situations. For most people, they are unusual, extreme situations. Your brain is in kind of a panic mode. It's hard to think straight. It's hard to remember your location, to determine your location, and also to communicate location. And sometimes there's not even an address you can communicate. If you are in the middle of the woods, what would be your address? So it's quite clear that we need technology to assist us in those situations. When we are unable to determine our location, we are somewhere in the woods. When we are unable to communicate our precise location, so as just the example before, the Radisson Blu Hotel might not be the precise location information. And of course, when we are unable to communicate at all, when we are unconscious for an automatic emergency conversation, for example, children which dial 112 but then cannot communicate any further, or if you cannot speak for any reason. So we need technology to assist us to determine the location information, of course, as quickly as possible and as accurately as possible. And after that, we need to transmit that information to the PSAPs as fast as possible, and also in a machine-readable, standardized way. Coming to NG112, and let's take a step back. Why do we need location in the first place? So basically we have two different reasons why we need location information. We have the reason for routing and for dispatch. And of course routing means we kind of ask the question, who can provide me help at the place where I am? And from the key requirements here is, of course, time is always critical, but when you think about routing to the most appropriate PSAP, you kind of need that location information for routing as soon as possible, more or less immediately at the call setup. Accuracy-wise, it's, of course, the higher the accuracy, the better, but in general, medium to high might be fair enough for routing capabilities. So, as from the example before, it probably would not matter if we call 112 from this Radisson Blu Hotel or from the Radisson Blu Hotel down the street. We will basically probably end up in the same PSAP. On the other side, we have location information which we need for dispatching purposes. which is more the question of where should the help be provided. And key requirements here is that time-wise we have a little bit more time, so talking about seconds but not minutes, but the accuracy needs to be very high. If I'm in the middle of the street having a heart attack and the ambulance is around the corner, they cannot provide me help. So we need really high accuracy here to dispatch our resources. So now that we've seen the purpose or how location can be used, how can location be represented in NG Moment 2? So basically we have two different forms. We have the civic way, which is in form of an address. We have a structure with a certain hierarchy. So we have the country, the state, the city, road, house number, etc. On the other side, we have the geodetic format, which is the representation in form of a geographical shape, so point, circle, or more sophisticated ones like arcband or polygons. So, okay, now we established or know how location information is represented, but the last thing is we need to transport it as well. And again, we have two possibilities here. We can either transport location information by value or by reference. So if you probably all know, NG Moment 2 is based on voice over IP, and in voice over IP we have a lot of SIP messages or SIP invites for the initialization of an emergency conversation. A SIP message usually contains SIP headers and a SIP body with the media information, voice, video, or texting, for example. And transporting location information by value simply means that we pack that location information, as we've seen with the representation, we add it to the body directly. Which means that any entity processing that SIP message can simply retrieve that information and evaluate it. On the other side, by reference, we have a SIP, a pointer towards that location information in the header, and we do not have it in the SIP body. And that, of course, means that any entity processing that SIP message needs to first resolve the location information if it wants to evaluate it. Coming to the location information handling now, what's the flow, what's the call flow in NG Moment 2? So as you probably all know, NG Moment 2, the NG Moment 2 architecture describes the core components and the interfaces within an ESINet, an IP-based emergency service network. And that altogether, those interfaces, the different components, and the specified integration provides us with the powerful routing capabilities. So not only can we route by location, we can route by daytime, nighttime shifts, for example, PSAP states, whether they are under heavy load, maintenance, something like that, or even capabilities. So you might have specialized PSAPs for the deaf community, where you have video with sign language. So all of those things make up basically the ESINet and the powerful routing capabilities. But probably the most important aspect of the ESINet is that it's accessible by any trusted source. So we're not thinking only about mobile network operators. We think about voice over IP providers, application providers. Any trusted source can initiate an emergency conversation and forward it to the ESINet, and this is a very important point. Also, IoT providers, for example. So if you think about, you have sensors, you have CCTV cameras, alarming systems, all those things can provide emergency conversations. So how does the general conversation look like in NG Moment 2? So here we have an ESINet, we have the border control functions kind of protecting the ESINet, acting as a firewall. We have the emergency service routing proxy in the middle, DSRP, and we have the emergency call routing function, ECRF. So once a SIP call is made, including the location information, either by value or by reference, it receives a DSRP. DSRP has a policy routing function, so it has a lot of rules what to do with an emergency conversation. And usually one of the first rules is to query or to determine who is responsible for a certain service at a certain location. And for that, it takes the location information and queries the ECRF, the emergency call routing function. And here, we're using location information for routing purposes. The ECRF goes into its internal geographical database and determines what is the correct PSAP for a specific service at the specific location. It then provides that information back to the ESRP, which then forwards the call to the appropriate PSAP. So now we have the call at the PSAP side, and once an operator accepts the call, we have communication. So one of the first things usually when you have established a communication after you told them what the incident was, one of the first questions will be, what is your address? Why are we doing that? Because we need to figure out the dispatchable location. And if we have a communication channel, normally the person on the other end can simply determine transporting the location information by just speaking it, basically. But here we have a problem. As discussed before, sometimes there is no further communication. So imagine you have a phone call, you take the phone call, and basically you only hear screaming, and then the phone hangs up. What do you do? Where can you dispatch? And that's our big problem. Can we send resources somewhere? Does it make sense? And that quite depends on the location, on the origin of the location. So if you take, for example, the classic landline use case where we have a physical correlation between the phone number and the address, it's quite easy. We can look it up based on the phone number, and we get the address as the dispatchable location. How does it look like for eCall? Classic use case where you're unconscious, your airbag went off, and the call initiates an emergency conversation. So here, the car, the entity which triggers the emergency conversation, retrieves its location via GNSS. And then it can transmit that location, and from the control room perspective, even without further communication, we can dispatch to that location. Probably currently the most common use case, what do we do with 2G, 3G emergency calling? So usually we only get the cell tower location or the location via triangulation. And as we probably all know, those ranges, those coverages are quite far, especially on the countryside, and it's quite hard to dispatch locations in a radius of 10 kilometers, even probably it's not even possible. And we've come around technologies, AML, to work around that, and I will come up to that in a second. So, but the idea of NG112 or the SINet or also NG911 is to have a voice over LTE emergency conversation. So this also includes the capabilities of voice, video, and texting. And here again, the triggering device, the initiating entity, the mobile, retrieves its information, its location via GNSS, Wi-Fi, or other cell tower location information. And then it can transmit that with the call, and we can dispatch to that location. So until we are there, we have cool technology, AML, and there are also some entities which cannot provide the location information at the initialization of an emergency call. And how are we going to deal that within NG112? So how do we request additional location information? So in NG112, we have an entity called the LIS, the Location Information Server. And basically, it provides one interface to the PSAPs. And PSAPs can query for a location for a certain number. And the good thing is that the list can hide a lot of technology to connect to and retrieve that information for the PSAP. So it can integrate with databases, mobile network providers for triangulation. It can integrate with phone books for civic addresses. And of course, it can also be an AML endpoint. So that means if the LIS receives AML via SMS or HTTPS, it can then provide that information back to the PSAP. To sum it all up, we all know location information is key. It's critical to determine the most appropriate PSAP for routing purposes. We need a precise location for dispatching, and of course, as said, or as clearly made in the beginning as an example, we need technical assistance when we are in such stressful situations. And NG112 is quite the enabler for such modern emergency services. We can route any conversation, voice, video, text. We have a standardized way, a standard representation of location information, which is really important when it comes to extensibility of the system. And then such, we have a future-proof and flexible way to also integrate new technology. But if I would need to leave you with one key statement today, what I would like you to take away from my presentation is when you think about the digitalization of emergency services, do not think about just adopting it to one technology, to one way of how we are communicating now. Think of it more like providing a digital IP-based foundation for future innovation and technologies based on standardized interface and components. And that's exactly what NG112 is all about. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Michael. And I have to commend you on what, in my view, is the clearest explanation of how location works in NG112 I've ever seen. So well done on that.
Thanks.
Any questions from the audience for Michael? Anyone? Well, while you're thinking, maybe I'll ask a question. You described their location by reference and location by value. Why would you, if you're implementing, why would you choose one method over another?
Oh, that's a good question, thanks. I mean, I think it quite depends on what your current technology provides and capabilities, because basically there should not be a difference. All ESINet components, all core components need to understand both ways. We had a speaker before who said, okay, for them it was easier to do location by reference, and I can see that especially if you have some legacy systems, for example, there are some network capabilities which may work better with location by reference, but in general it shouldn't make a much difference.
Okay.
Any other questions?
No?
Okay.
Okay, thank you, Michael. That was great.
Thank you.
Okay, our next speaker is Deepti Bharti from Creativity Software, and Deepti is going to talk about location intelligence in next generation. Thank you, Deepti. The floor is yours.
Okay, good evening all. Welcome to this session. Today I'm going to talk about next generation location intelligence in emergency services. I'll start by reiterating what Michael has already mentioned about why location technology, and especially the automatic location information, is so important in emergency communication. Then I'll take you through the various location technology that are working today, especially in Europe. And then we'll talk about how these location technologies would evolve for the next generation emergency services and communication. And if time permits, then I'll also talk about, give you an introduction about Creativity Software, which is the company I work for. Okay, so again, reiterating with what Michael has already mentioned, why location technology is so important. So we need the location information in emergency communication to, first of all, route an emergency call to the right location. By location, I mean to the most nearest and most relevant PSAP. And then also provide the location information of the emergency caller to the PSAP for the emergency dispatch. So it is quite key that the location information is provided quickly, so it is fast. The location information is accurate and also is reliable. So let's start by looking at some of the location technologies that we have today. I'll look at the main mechanisms that are in place. So we'll start by fixed line address lookup and ALI lookup, which is the oldest mechanism that represents a very small number of emergency calls which are made from the PSTN network. The next is mobile network-based location. So all the devices ranging from 2G, 3G, 4G, connecting to these network technologies and a variety of devices, the location information of such devices can be provided and generated by the location network. Then we have AML, and this is the latest mechanism which is used where a smartphone will automatically generate the location using hybrid or GNSS, Wi-Fi, or cell ID based information. And then lastly, we have eCall, which is a system which, when installed in a vehicle, can generate emergency call, can set up a call if that device or that car is involved in an incident, and provide the location information along with minimum set data to the PSAP via the mobile network. So looking at fixed line a bit more, the location, so this is, as I said earlier, this is the oldest location generation mechanism, and the key point here is that the location intelligence is either sitting in the PSAP, which performs an address lookup, or with the PSTN service provider, but there is no information, no location information in the device itself. And from there we move towards the mobile network, which are, as you may all know, heterogeneous in nature, which means there are different types of network technologies which coexist in most of the mobile networks today. So technologies like 2G, 3G, 4G, IMS, and now even 5G technologies are being deployed in the mobile network. And there are a variety of devices that can connect to this mobile network, ranging from legacy devices to smartphones, even connected cars. So the mobile networks have the capability wherein they can, if required, generate the location, and it would depend upon different mandate and different type of deployments varying from country to country as to what kind of accuracy can be generated from the mobile network. But usually there are two steps that the mobile network performs for an emergency call. So one is when it is setting up the emergency call, it uses the location information to route the call to the right PSAP. Whether it's 2G, 3G network, then the MSC or switch would be used, or if it's a 4G VoLTE-based call, then an eCCF node would be used to establish that call to the PSAPs. And then in the next step, finer location information or detailed location information is provided to the PSAP from the mobile network. It can either be done through a push or a pull method, and that may vary from deployment to deployment. But the crux is that there are nodes, standards-based nodes, which can be deployed in a mobile network, which can provide different type of location information. And just talking about that location information, I just want to highlight here that in most countries, it is mandated that mobile network provide at least cell level accuracy, but that accuracy can vary drastically. So it can be as accurate as 500 meters in a urban area, but that accuracy can go towards in kilometers if we are in a rural area. But nevertheless, there is capability within the network, if used. Further high accuracy can also be achieved. There are positioning techniques and positioning methods like assisted GPS, OTDOA, and enhanced cell ID that can be used to provide accuracy which is within the region of 50 meters. So in this case, as we can see, the location intelligence sits in the network. And then let's talk about AML. So we all know that now it is widely used in Europe. It's been deployed in 25 countries worldwide, and it is supported by Google and Apple on their handset OS, and is deployed countrywide, where the smartphone is able to generate its own location or a hybridized location using GNSS, Wi-Fi, and cell ID information, and then can pass that information as part of an SMS to the network and send it to the PSAP. So there are strengths and weaknesses currently to this method, as it relies heavily on handset to obtain the accurate location. There could be scenarios where the handset is not able to latch on to the GPS, maybe because the handset is indoors, or there are issues with the battery, it's running on low battery. It could be just that there is not enough data available. And similarly for Wi-Fi, at times the Wi-Fi results can be unreliable. So though this is quite a useful location technique, but I think there is still more room for improvement and to reduce the error rate that we currently see. So let's look at the next generation location technologies. And I'll start by looking at the next generation service landscape. Again, Michael already explained about the ESI network, but the main landscape of next generation introduces the NG112 architecture. And this is the architecture which we understand will enable the modernization of emergency communication, as it will allow more data to be communicated between the handset and the PSAPs, and that data can include text, video, and can also enable, if required, live streaming to be made possible, and which in return will provide more efficient PSAP response to an incident. And then what is going to enable this NG112 architecture? That is going to be the emergency service IP network. So this is going to be the key factor here, that the whole architecture or the whole network is going to be based on IP technology. So this is a big shift from the current infrastructure and technologies that are in use, where a lot of interworking is required and different protocols are used, and a lot of bespoke implementation is done. So with the introduction of ESI net, it will enable the optimization of the emergency communication. And then one of the biggest upcoming changes to the emergency call will be that NG112 will be that it will be able to connect or receive emergency communication from a wide variety of devices and user equipments. It will range from PC and smartphones to IoT devices, or to IoT networks which are connected to, say, mobile network through which they can provide or establish emergency communication, to the next generation e-call, where the car is able to establish the signaling and also passes location information via the signaling itself, rather than relying on, say, a modem that currently has to be used for 2G, 3G network. So and what is going to enable all this is, the key point here is that the technology, the underlying technology, which is the SIP protocol, is going to make this end-to-end communication quite seamless, because this will be the protocol which would be supported by the handsets, by the devices, by the network, and also by the PSAPs. So it makes the whole communication seamless and efficient. Now, again, reiterating that the key enablers for this location technology, the first key enabler and the foremost key enabler is IP-based calling and IP-based signaling. This is what is going to allow such a wide variety of devices and applications to connect to NG112 architecture and ESI net. And then I think it is also very important to identify that the next generation of mobile network are also going to play a key role, because with 5G there would be we are already seeing that there are a lot of femtocells and microcells which are being deployed everywhere, and that is going to improve the accuracy. Even the cell level accuracy which we will receive would be much better than what we observe currently. And then because of the 5G deployment currently, most of the communication service providers are undergoing a huge digital transformation. So the IP was introduced in 4G, but because 4G is backward compatible, quite a lot of operators for emergency services, they use circuit switch fallback. So whenever a 4G subscriber makes an emergency call, that call fallbacks on 2G circuit switch, which means that the value that a 4G could have added by introducing location as part of SIP is not being utilized. But with 5G, we don't have that provision of doing a CS fallback, which means now the operators really have to implement IP-based techniques for emergency services. And then Wi-Fi technology and the maturing of the Wi-Fi technology is also going to be one of the key enablers for this next generation 112 location technology. Talking a bit more about the mobile networks, and especially 5G, we have talked about that it is definitely going to improve even the basic cell level accuracy, because there will be more cells which will be installed and deployed in the network. It is also going to improve the rich data that we want to exchange as part of NG112. So with 5G, with low latency and high speed, it will provide the capability that a lot of videos are sent, live stream data is made possible without interruption or without big delay. So 5G is going to be an enabler for that also. And as such, mobile networks will still act as kind of a fallback option, wherein if for some reason or the other the device is not able to calculate its location or provide its location information, then mobile networks would still be able to do that. So if you remember at the beginning, I mentioned that emergency location needs to provide fast, accurate, and reliable information. And the way we see this developing is that we see that we'll find that AML will continue to be adopted around the world, and there would be more improvements, and we hope that the errors and things like supporting roaming subscriber would be introduced as part of the AML. Then with more countries deploying 5G, we will see improvement in the location that is calculated by the mobile network. And as I said, third development would be the other networks like Wi-Fi. There would be more maturity in those networks, so that information like indoor location can be improved using this technology. Even height information and the floor information can be retrieved if this technology is used, or it matures so that it can be used reliably. And then the NG112 architecture, NG112 architecture is going to bring together all the different type of devices that can now establish emergency communications and send their location information in case of any emergency. So this whole, we know that gradually the location intelligence will move completely, more or less, into the devices. But this whole process would be an evolution and not a revolution. It is going to take time, and gradually we will see a shift, majority of the shift, where the devices will be able to send more reliable and accurate location information to the emergency service providers. So that's it on my presentation, and I will quickly give you an overview about my company. So my company's name is Creativity Software. It provides location-based services to mobile network operators and government agencies, and it provides very high accuracy location and location intelligence for emergency services, for law enforcement agencies, and also for monetization and compliance for mobile network. And it was founded in 2001 and our solution has been deployed in many countries, 17 countries, and in multiple continents. That is it from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Deepti. Just when the audience is thinking on questions, I might just make a comment. I like the way you use the term location intelligence and not location information. And the fact that you talk about evolution, not revolution, because really, I don't think any single solution is a panacea for location. And we can see that when you have complementary solutions, it's almost like the more you have, the better. You can really, get to a point where you have something that's really reliable. It increases reliability. So, yeah. Thank you. Any questions from the audience for Deepti? Yes, Peter.
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation. You mentioned that the coverage of cells in rural areas can be tens of kilometers, and in cities it is a lot less. And in 5G, we will have femtocells and microcells, but do you think that they will also show up in rural areas in 5G?
Well, eventually they will, but that will take time. So first of all, before deploying 5G cell, I would see more coverage provided by 4G. And then once we all know that networks are switching off either 2G or 3G technology, which means that 4G technology, first of all, is going to become more prevalent. So that radio coverage would be better, definitely, than 2G, 3G. And in years to come, then yes, even 5G would move towards rural, but initially it will be more focused in cities.
Yeah, because the cells are laid out in rural areas because of coverage, and in municipality areas, they are laid out for capacity. So you don't need microcells in rural areas, because you don't need big cells for the coverage.
Yeah, that's correct. But again, with 5G, 5G is, it again depends upon country and mobile network operator as to how they want to utilize or monetize on 5G. They can also provide broadband using 5G, and they can, if they are planning to, roll out connected cars or smart city, then they will have to provide that coverage beyond the cities. So as I said, it will happen, but I don't see that happening in the next couple of years.
Thank you.
Thanks, Peter. Thanks for your answer, Deepti. Any other questions? We still have time for one more, maybe?
Yep, Freddie, over here. Thank you.
Oh.
Thank you so much for using Google Maps, and particularly my neighbourhood in and around London. I recognise some of those places. I appreciate that. Mine's a comment, I suppose, rather than a question. I think you're absolutely right to look at the massive flexibility that IP-based networks give you. But there's nothing intrinsic in an IP network to improve location in itself. And I think the focus, as you point out, will be about devices and the device's ability to locate where they are and to then transmit that information across IP networks. So I think the important point is to say that there's nothing in the network itself, because it's IP, that improves location accuracy.
Yes, that's correct. So, as location information as part of the emergency communication, yes, accuracy is one aspect, but reliably forwarding that information and making that communication fast is also very important. So IP will provide that, but yes, device itself, the location information will have to be within the device, and the mobile networks, can provide that fallback if for some reason that device is not able to calculate the location, or in some scenarios, network operators can also validate that location, whether that location is correct or not. Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? No? Okay, Deepti, thank you very much. Actually, you did make another good point about the circuit switch fallback, and when 4G is gone, that's gone. So we'll have to move to an IP-based network at that stage. Okay, thank you. And our final speaker in this session is Peter Woodford. And Peter's going to talk about a tag-based methodology for caller location in next generation. Peter, take it away.
Thank you very much. Just before I get started, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thanks to Gary and Freddie and the rest of the EENA team for putting their necks on the line to organize an event like this in the height of a pandemic. Pulling together an event like this at the best of times is a challenge, but kudos to you and your team for doing a fabulous job. So my name is Peter from Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada, hometown of Badek, if you might need Google Maps to find that. And thank you all for coming. I'm going to talk about an extension to the previous speakers in that how the importance of location, how it's going to get transmitted both in a legacy environment through to a next generation environment. And what we're going to talk about this afternoon is a tag-based methodology that can be the source of that location that will help enable better location, dispatchable address, indoor location, and next generation call routing. I think we're all pretty aware of the importance of location, location, location. We can't provide help to an individual in need unless we actually know where the help is required. It's oftentimes in any industry we need a tragic event to get change to happen to elicit the momentum of change, and that's quite unfortunate. The regulatory bodies are starting to make a push and changes to elicit improvements to localization and improvements to emergency services globally. The FCC is really pushing through the RABOM Act for dispatchable address. The European Commission through the Electronic Communications Commission is making improvements, and there's a couple of other initiatives underway to provide the incentive and the push that sometimes is required to make those location improvements. A really key thing here is a study that was done by the FCC in the United States that the lack of adequate localization costs over 10,000 lives per year. That's each and every year. Europe is a similar population to the United States, so that's a very, very dramatic amount, and that's kind of what our industry is all about, is helping protecting people, excuse me, people, assets, and saving lives. So that's one person per hour in the United States loses their life because of the challenge we face in the industry of localization. This slide is kind of about where we're all ending up, and what we've talked about in the previous speakers is that we need the right door to knock on, if you will. Ever since we're a kid, we're trained in physical civic addressing system with a street sign, a building with a building number. Even our elevators have floor numbers and then apartment numbers, and that's a dispatchable address. And that's the type of information that first responders need in order to provide the assistance that's required. So it's the right door to knock on is the objective. So how a tag-based methodology works, and we talked about earlier the evolution of 112, and that we started out with landlines, then with the evolution of digitization, we had enhanced 911, my apologies, 112, through to mobile, where we're back to enhanced 112. And then with AML and other services, we're better able to get some location with X, Y, and potentially Z. With a tag-based methodology, we're able to get back to a dispatchable address. So much like the gold standard or the landline methodology, we're able to associate a location to a phone number. We're unable to do that with mobile devices and IP devices, but we are able to use the same model in that the internet access points that everybody has in their home and in their business, the internet service providers and telecoms know the address, the physical address of their endpoints, and those endpoints are broadcasting outside of the security layer a variety of information, including a MAC address, SSID, and what we're talking about here, which is a tag, excuse me, which is a unique identifier that's inserted into the beacon frame and broadcast outside of the security layer. Those identifiers are then stored in a 112 database that relate that identifier to the physical address of that access point. So they're available, and it ends up establishing a nationwide network of verified location data points that are broadcast 24/7. So when an individual dials an emergency number on a phone, it activates the operating system protocol, such as the one for AML, where the device turns on all functionality, does a Wi-Fi scan, as well as a GPS shot. That Wi-Fi scan and GPS information can then be sent to a processor that would analyze the Wi-Fi environment. And then the unique feature of this tag-based methodology is that when it's using a Wi-Fi reference point, much like a cell tower, the location of that Wi-Fi access point has been verified to a dispatchable address in the database. So that environment then gets analyzed, and the dispatchable address plus X, Y, and Z, if it's available, can then get passed along to the 112 operator, and then dispatch can happen immediately. So what ends up happening is that we're back to the landline, the gold standard landline model, where the dispatchable address arrives at the same time as the voice. So what we have here for you is a video of a demonstration of the impact that a tag-based methodology can have. It's an indoor environment where a call is initiated, and then a victim walks through a building, and we're able to track them.
Welcome to our Emergency Mobile Location, or EML video. What you are about to see is a simulation of a real-time emergency call, demonstrating the advanced indoor location capabilities of the patented EML methodology. Our caller is using a Samsung handset operating on the Tele2 network. You will notice two screens, the Public Safety Answering Point, or PSAP, location information, and the indoor journey of our caller. EML is a patented methodology using the existing Wi-Fi access point ecosystem to provide verified dispatchable addresses, including GPS, floor, and apartment numbers. It turns an ISP's access point into a location beacon, which publishes unique identifiers, or tags. In the event of an emergency call, this tag data is provided to the PSAP, and emergency responders are immediately dispatched to an accurate location. Once we reach the third floor, begin to notice the indoor description and floor number on the PSAP adjust every few seconds with the movement of the phone. Our caller now begins to make his way down the staircase to the second floor. Notice the vertical location data changing. Departing the second floor, we now make our way down to the first floor. We arrive at floor number 1. The EML methodology continually pushes location and other relevant data updates every few seconds. Video is also provided, demonstrating EML's advanced data provision capabilities and next-generation services. We are now in the corridor on the first floor. We arrive at the East Wing bathrooms. EML's tag system is encrypted and dynamic. It is also technologically neutral and GDPR privacy compliant. EML may also be used on any mobile device and network provider. We now reach the East Wing Mini Studios. EML is available today and will help drive change in responding to emergencies and potentially save thousands of lives lost each year from inaccurate location data. Descending the stairs, we once again return to where we started, in the reception area. EML provides best-in-class rural, urban, and indoor mobile location information. Thank you for watching this live demonstration of EML, the next step in Next Generation 112.
So that's a demonstration of a tag-based methodology working in a very challenging environment for localization indoor. So you're able to provide dispatchable address as well as X, Y, and Z if it is available. Here's another example of how that indoor location dispatchable address can be used in other ways. What we have here is a screen capture of another demonstration with the dispatchable address in the yellow circle. That dispatchable address can then be used to create a link to an indoor floor plan, a GIS mapping. So it'll exactly display the location of where that caller is inside a facility. Other items such as first response things, such as fire extinguishers, defibrillators, and so forth can also be displayed here. So door codes, any other additional information that's available about that site can be included with that information. So how does the tag-based methodology not only provide dispatchable address and GPS coordinates, but how does it integrate and help us in this transition to next generation? So this is part of the EENA and ETSI standard for next generation. One of the key elements here is the location has to happen at the same time that the call is received so that call routing can be effectively done. And today, it's a challenge of where does the location come from that sits inside the LIS. The over-the-top or VoLTE service providers don't have it, and the network service providers don't have visibility into the activity that's taking place. Then the second part is, how does it get received with the caller at the same time of the call, and then get into the SINet and the call routing function to make call routing happen in an effective manner. So those tags, or the location elements on every internet access point, can be that location element that makes next generation call routing work. Those location elements can actually be included inside of the call during the setup, so that each packet that goes with the call stream will hit the SINet, the call routing function capability kicks in. Or if you're a non-cellular device, such as a laptop or an iPad, the Wi-Fi access point that device is connected to make that call can then pick up the tag or the location element from the Wi-Fi access point. So in that regard, it becomes an enabler for the call routing functionality built in to next generation, and it also enables that territory to retire the legacy equipment that they need to keep around to enable call routing. Once this nationwide network of verified location data points are established, they're broadcast 24/7, and they can be used for a variety of other services, including persons with disability, SIP applications, 112 applications, voice over internet, Internet of Things, social media, private networks. So any device, anywhere, anytime can now have access to 112 with dispatchable address and XYZ. The last item here is kind of interesting as well. Next generation enables the addition of additional useful data related to an emergency event. And one of the challenges with additional data is to be able to associate what's useful data and what isn't. What data is associated to the particular event and the particular call. And with the location element coming in with those pieces of data, they can easily be associated to that event or that call. So that's how a tag-based methodology can help next generation functionality. So real-world testing, you see some live test calls on this. It's been technically audited with 380 different test case scenarios and all over the world. Privacy is a major issue, as is data integrity. The tag further anonymizes and provides higher level of security for 112 networks. The information of the tag, the MAC address, is not associated to an individual. They can be dynamically changed, encrypted in transport, and only the authorized agency is able to use that information. This TagBased methodology, we tested it with one of the leading 112 operators and put them through a design thinking workshop, which is a rather extraordinary experience where we had a variety of call takers and went through the business transaction of an emergency call where the 112 caller and the call taker interact, and analyzed how does that work today, and then how that would change with dispatchable address and XYZ at the time of the call. And some of the key outcomes were 30 to 90 seconds saved on each and every call, stress reduction for both the caller and the call taker. And both of those are really critical elements when we look at what's happened with 112 during the pandemic. And then it becomes an enabler for next generation and future states, which leads to more lives saved. So thank you very much for your time and attention. Is there any questions?
Thank you, Peter. Okay. Any questions? Yes, in the front here, front row.
Hello. Can you elaborate on the actual deployment of the TagBased methodology?
Thank you. So all of the components of a tag-based methodology already exist today, so there's not a significant amount of infrastructure change or an improvement. The database of internet access points are there, the handset protocols are in place. So what typically happens is a feasibility and technical scoping exercise would go through with the 112 operator, whereby not only a technical scoping to build the module that is the tag-based methodology, but also some business impacts. So then once that technical scoping is done, that module gets built with the appropriate APIs so that the telecoms can send the information in, the information gets processed, and then the location information is presented to the 112 call taker through an API in the correct format. And that can all happen independent of the operation today. So the operation is going on, the scoping is done, the technology gets built, then it gets bolted on to the existing infrastructure. And to Freddie's point, it doesn't mean that you have to shut something off. Everything that you do today can keep running, and then you get an additional data source of information that's validated and verified, so that they work very complementary with everything else. So from a 112 operator's perspective, it's not a huge disruption in their service. Once they make the decision to go and the technical scoping's done, the service provider will end up doing all the work.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah, actually, I saw a live demo of it yesterday from Peter, and it just got me thinking about it's really good, actually, if you want to corner him at a coffee break and see if he'll show it to you. But it is pretty impressive. I guess one of the questions I would have is how much of a challenge is the mapping? Because you can see there that you're walking around a building, so you would need to map the building in terms of where the access points are to be able to do that.
Correct. So there's two types of networks. What we call a public network, where the internet service provider actually provisions the endpoint in someone's home or their apartment. And then there's private networks, which is typically the internet service provider drops service off at the front door, and then that organization would run their own network. So on the public network side, the internet service providers would provide that data. And if you've ever had trouble with your internet and you call your internet service provider, the first thing they ask you is, what's your address? You can hear them clicking away, and it brings up all the information, including the location, the MAC address, and so forth. On the private side, that information then becomes the responsibility of the private network owner to provide it. And there's various levels of quality of that. One of the things that a tag-based methodology uses or incorporates is enhanced utilization of that data to make sure that the data is maintained at a high level. The floor plans can also be provided by that private network owner or public network owner, so that that visibility would also be made, and that would be an example of an additional piece of data that would be related to an event that Next Generation enables.
Okay, thanks. Any other questions? No? Yes, Troy?
Could you comment on what would motivate the big telecoms to provide the data to support the TAG methodology?
Thank you. So any improvement to 112, and it's kind of a choreography between the 112 operator, the telecoms, and the telecom regulator. And it becomes very much a stakeholder approach that any improvements that we want to make to 112 or localization or anything else that impacts our industry, if it doesn't work for all three groups, it's not going to be successful. With the tag-based methodology, it enables a telecom service provider to provide a higher level of safety for their customers. It also enables them to do some other things like quality assurance of their databases and so forth. It also enables them perhaps to retire some of the network architecture that they have that they don't generate revenue from, but they need to maintain for 112. And lastly, it's a good thing to do, to be a good corporate citizen, and most telecoms are very supportive of 112. And lastly, I always laugh when I talk to telecom regulators, is they say every time we go to the telecoms to ask them to make an improvement for emergency services, the first thing they say is, how much does it cost? So with this methodology, there's a tremendous amount of cost recoveries, and typically the 112 operator would pay for it. So now the burden of cost is not on the telecoms, so they're highly motivated from being good corporate citizens as well as a business case to participate.
Okay, thank you. All right, if there's no other questions, we're just over time, so that's great. Before we conclude, I just have a couple of announcements to make. So we have the social event tonight. Your booklet says it starts at 8:30. We start gathering together at 8:15, just outside the front door of the hotel. And I'm going to read this out in case I leave a point out. I'm not going to summarize it. Join us for a pleasant evening, along with international colleagues, during a free walking tour of the city of Riga by night. Our experienced guides will take you in small groups around the city, stopping at the architectural gems of Riga. Is that what we call pubs now? Architectural gems? To discover its fascinating history. You don't need to register for this, so once again, just 8:15, just outside the front door of the hotel. And then, just to remind you, that's the end of the track sessions. We'll be back in this room tomorrow at 9 for a keynote from Robert Sell on open source intelligence. So that starts at 9 o'clock in this room tomorrow morning. So that just leaves me to say a big thank you to our speakers in this particular session, to Michael Pröstler, to Deepti, Bharti, and Peter Woodford. If you'd show your appreciation for them, please. Thank you.